Hi, another conversation with Ann Kahn and Gary Frost. And Gary Frost is a world famous conservator who's combing his hair, but he looks gorgeous anyway. Um, and we are back at the uh, book model book room. And this time we're going to talk about journals that are in the collection. And Gary's going to show his journals, and I hope some more. And these are journals that are actually written in. If you remember, the model room had models of various types of books that were done over a period of centuries. So, Gary, take it away. Introduce yourself and, you know,
Well, good morning. I am Gary Frost, by current evidence or elsewise. I believe the topic is handmade journals. Is that right?
well, it's journals that have been written in and handmade journals, yes.
Well, hmm, certainly the first half portion of the history of the book are handwritten
Right, handwritten journals,
books.
right.
They were handmade by default. They're in, let's call it a pre-15th century situation worldwide. They are handmade by default uh, and handwritten by default. But that wasn't the end of the manuscript book. I believe you're um, suggesting that there's still a functional role
Yes,
for handwritten books.
I am.
Well, done deal. I agree. We have many blank books that are awaiting in this collection. It's called the Book Model Collection, that are awaiting some kinds of inscriptions. Now, there are various kinds of inscriptions. One is just a annotation to the ownership. So you can open a printed book, for example, and sometimes see who owned it. May even be lucky enough to have that annotation dated, in which case it helps us looking at historical books, because if it is the initial binding, that's what we call it, uh, and the initial end papers, it tends to corroborate the date of the binding, which is a very movable aspect of the making of books. Okay, sorry, don't want to track off too far here. We're still talking about handmade journals, right?
Right.
And my, I do use a lot of handmade, handwritten journals, and there's a couple of fundamental reasons. One, I'm a bookbinder. So guess what? I use them as field testing uh, units, if you will, so that I can, for example, date a handbound book and watch what happens when I start to make entries over a period of a year or more. So you might say that what I have is uh, models of models. In other words, they're test beds for types of bookbinding. I'm a little bit quirky on that. Uh, I want to get something off the shelf. I'll be right back. while I'm talking about that first instance of interest that I have about testing book bindings, I wanted to mention, of course, let me see if I can do it without reflection. I can hardly do it. These are a picture of Shauna Lino's journals, but you see there, Shauna is, as well as a bookbinder, an artist. So you have books that appeal as, if you will, artisanal artworks. And that's an important issue because mine are not. Mine tend to be, in the first priority, simply uh, tests of different kinds of bookbinding. However, there's also a second use, universally shared, that journals are uh, conversations with yourself. Now, this is a reflexive, it doesn't need a lot of explanation, but journals are acting like a social media with your own self. You got that?
I got that.
Good.
I
Because
sort of
that,
agree with that too.
yes, and that's a universal function. There are probably very few old hand bookbinders that are testing different kinds of bookbindings, but they're probably every setting in which a person authoring a journal is actually talking with themselves.
They're also talking with time, that they're doing it over a period of time. So they're not only talking with themselves, they're talking with time. Like, do you get what I'm saying?
I do, because I've already mentioned as well that an ownership annotation, if dated, is a very important evidence. And you can and should date your entries into a journal. Very important in the long run. And that has to do with the longevity of books, which tends to outlive the authors. So it's helpful down the line. The likelihood of someone reading it is rather obscure, and many journals don't survive. Uh, Leonardo's sketchbooks do. And you have to wonder why at first that happened. But it did. However, almost everyone's journaling is done for their own diagnostic of their own behaviors, own aspirations, own achievements. And therefore, it's, I don't know, kind of strange content. And in fact, I find that I never reread journal entries unless I have some odd agenda in mind that I know there's evidence of it. What what I do think happens is that journaling is a phase of authorship. I'll stop there because I will track off on another narrative.
Well, do you have some journals to show?
Well, of course I do.
Well, then let's see them.
Oh, I thought you'd never ask.
All right.
Uh, my journals, to begin with, uh, cover an entire spectrum of uh, You see, they won't look like anything, right? But they could be a fold-bound flange end type of bookbinding. I'll show you one later. They could look like an Ethiopic catechism phone book. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Why would you have one? Well, this one was carried around in Peru. And look at that. It's dated on the front, but no one can read my writing. So we'll have to leave it at that. However, I happen to know that that's what this is, and that, like a talisman, I wore this on the streets. Let's see if I can successfully. This is called a madar. Put this together. Wore it on the streets as if it were, as if it is my catechism. And so that's one kind. As happens, I just pull them off the shelf. All right. Let's see. See, I pulled them off my shelf. And look at, there are different colors, there are different types, there are different this, that, and the other. As I said, one of the agendas is just to try them out. Some of them are filled with annotation. Some.
So would you call them journal models? Your journal model record keeping.
That's right. It's an ambivalence, but my journals act as models or field tests of types of bookbinding.
Okay.
That's why they don't look like Shauna's, all right? See, they just look like hand bookbindings, right? But what I'm actually doing is trying them out and learning a little bit about how they survive use. Each of these has a narrative. Probably a lot of them have what's called writing. All right. Notice that it's used straight through from the start, and then it's turned around and gone straight through again from a subsequent dating, right? So I get two uses out of one book. And what does that mean? I get plenty of field testing of a type of bookbinding. What else to know? Well, there's a lot of variety. I think you've already heard my motivations and my ulterior motives, right?
I think so. I think the difference between your journal and the artistic journal and the writer's journal is that yours is a record keeping of the model itself.
Yes. Plus, I'm talking to myself. For example,
you're talking to yourself about the model, or are you talking to yourself about more than that?
I'm talking to myself about myself and some of my, what we'll call investigatory intentions. They could be historical, looking at book studies generally, or they might be a commentary on a New York Times
article
this of a given morning, where I just had to write down what I thought. I'll give you an example. I started one morning reading about Christian nationalism and its political sway on what we'll call party politics. And it was a good report of a Christian nationalist meeting. Wake Up America is the trade name or the name of this traveling roadshow. At some point, you're just going to have to stop me.
Keep
Right.
going, Gary. I'm fine.
Okay, let me know. Traveling roadshow on Christian nationalism. What is that? That's ambivalent enough in itself. And Donald Trump called in to the meeting. It was in the Trump Doral Resort Hotel in Miami. Very fancy. He had a quote, which I immediately took on as both a lyric and a historical agenda. He said, I paraphrase, well, greetings at a to the group at a wonderful, wonderful hotel. But we know that there's a larger purpose in this meeting. I admit it's a close parallel. It's a bad sentence. You're combining two things. You're talking about comfortable luxury accommodations, and you're talking about a larger
Venue for.
political agenda in one sentence.
Mhm.
That's where I got the cue, because the meeting was about tourism and about nationalism within the domain of what we'll call codified behavior of Christianity. I, I have to say, it's a bad sentence, but a very good one. And so I went from that to my thematic, the title being Evangelical Tourism. And I found that it's a quite interesting and intrusive agenda or topic that I could follow, and I did, in a number of directions. So you see, my content is not about the performance of book bindings. The performance of book bindings is something to just watch or observe or to scrutinize or to critique. But basically, it's also this opportunity to talk to yourself. I would have, within the next 15 minutes, forgotten that topic or lost that topic because I had to write it down immediately. It's almost like recording a dream. And that's what I have in content. And frankly, because I go on to develop a narrative from the journal, it's not the finished product. Where I go next is to the keyboard and to Word and brush up that faulty narrative from the journal. But if the narrative was not there, I would not have my secondary prompt into what we call printing. Now, printing could still be very idiosyncratic today. It wasn't previously. Typesetting was a formal transition from manuscript, and printing was a formal duplication and distribution
Are
of
you saying,
manuscript.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but are you saying that when you move from your idea of Christian nationalism to the computer to follow through on it, I'm assuming that you are in essence following also a line right down from the printing press?
That's a very important observation you're making, in my opinion. But do we want to go on forever here?
Well, we don't want to go on forever necessarily, but that's an interesting analogy
Sure it
because it
is.
is printing and it is done on
Manuscripts
electronically.
manuscripts do precede printing, but that's the simplest transition or handoff. They go ahead.
No, it's just, I think it's a brilliant analogy and it goes from, it covers a whole, and what I said, that it was not just a matter of keeping a record of something, but also having to do with time. And
Yes.
so in all these cases, you're keeping a record, you're responding, you're indulging your thoughts, but you're also having to do with time, having to do with actual time that this takes place. That you're jumping from the printing press to the computer, from the hand printed word, and that precedes the printing press, and then was interpreted onto a printing press, and then from a journal that you're keeping a record in to a computer where you're continuing your dialogue with yourself or with others about the printing press. And the New York Times of that day, or maybe 2 days before.
There is more both at stake and in transformation going on here. There was a time, a pre-literate time, in which the Homeric epics were remembered without writing.
Oral
Yes.
history.
Um, and there are a lot of other transactions that happen subsequently. Uh, Now we get into some really interesting territory. But I'll give you a good example of how layered the transactions of thought to physical media is. And of course, it comes from my fandom of the history out in the Amana colonies, so called, the history, the 300 years history of uh, an enclave of latter day inspirationists. That is to say, an enclave interested in the testimony of living people. That's very popular in the 19th century. So, what happened? Well, it turned out that divine inspiration could happen at any time through the medium of a person, a living person. Well, the problem was that this happened during an entranced experience. So here you have a person giving or delivering divine instruction, a testimonial in a trance. Later in the day, you could ask that person, well, what was it? They would have no clue. They were entranced. Well, others were assigned to
The
write it
scribe.
down.
The
And
scribe.
so how quick could you have to be to understand and write down verbatim a trance? You had to be quick. I'm fairly convinced that the scribal amanuensis was working with shorthand. But other evidence from the history of the enclave suggests there were two or three people taking it down simultaneously. But already there was ambient disturbance and other impediments to the transcription. So here it is, the rough transcription. What happened to that? You had to rewrite it into what's called a fair copy. You couldn't give that to a printer. Oh no, the printer would be doing the divine instruction on his own, trying to compose gibberish. No, there had to be a fair copy from the what we call the on-site uh, document mission, and therefore you had this fair copy, and where would that go? That would go to the examination of the congregational elders, because the decision to print was itself both a liturgical and philosophic issue.
But
What was
wouldn't the elders then take it and add their own interpretation on it? So
very
you have
good.
level upon level upon
Upon
level of
level, we're
interpretation.
getting close, but uh, they would, and their addition was the editorial process, what to print and what not to print.
Mhm, mhm.
My guess is that they're examining what's called the fair copy, and they're looking at it in a larger context. Remember, this group is a self-publishing group, ran its communally here in the U.S., ran its own print shop and bookbindery. So the elders are making this editorial decision. They're acting like the publishers, and they are. So that's another whole level. If you then, being the elders, decided to print the book, remember they printed a book per year for over 300 years, 300 books in editions where they decided to print up to thousands. This is kind of an over motivation. The group itself was only 1,800 people. So they were only printing for themselves, but nevertheless, they were deciding to print or not to print. However, as if you will, a kind of a Germanic command of what they're doing, the fair copies are preserved to this day in the archives and are there.
Of the Vatican.
Sorry?
Of the Vatican. They're preserved. Where are they preserved? Are they preserved in
They're
the
preserved
Vatican?
in the what's now called the Amana Church Archives, which is a archival repository of the history of the enclave itself, called the Church of the True Inspiration.
Gary,
German
where is
speaking.
this church?
Where is this church?
Yeah.
There is not a church, it's called a meeting house. I don't know if you're acquainted with some of the liturgical affectations, say, for example, of the Shakers. Well, without going off our topic here, because I am talking about the transition between the handoffs, which tend to be complex, to printing, and to continue that story without sidetracking into the difference between a meeting house. It's simply called a church. It's a term of assimilation.
Okay,
All
just a minute. This is the same thing that happens in the Vatican libraries.
right.
And but you're talking about the American version of this.
Yes, yeah,
It's the Amish meeting house kind of
exactly. Yeah.
uh,
It's not
uh
an Amish congregation by any means, but uh, that I would refer to as another devotional liturgical behavior associated with Orthodox German Anabaptist behavior. That includes Mennonite and Amish. The Church of the True Inspiration, the people of Amana, derived from that legacy and from that history, are not Orthodox. They're very entrepreneurial,
so
very
what you're
inventive.
talking about is the people that live right down the street from us.
About 14 miles from here,
Yeah,
from where we're sitting.
I was gonna say.
Yeah,
You
it's
haven't gone very far from home. That's all I have to say.
no, not at all. You can visit
Where do they keep these things?
in the archive building. I can't illustrate it with anything at hand here, but let me just say this. The group, being rather small, expatriated from Germany and arrived, presumably, on the East Coast. And sorry, I'm not going to go too far astray here. They landed first in Western New York, near Buffalo, New York. And they built a village there, built more than a village, built some industry over the next few decades until about the time of the beginning of the Civil War in this country. And then they moved again, and they moved all the way to Iowa to where we know the communities now, called the Amanas. There are 6 villages. Each had a meeting house, or what in English would be called a church, I guess. And so, yes, see, now we're wandering away from our thread. What happened after the elders decided to print? There's a mandate for this, by the way, by one of the famous Herzog, the inspired leaders, Christian Metz, 1846, a mandate to print. Very interesting document, very interesting testimonials to print. Okay, but what happened? The elders handed it off to compositors at the case. These were people picking out letter by letter the composition and locking it up. That's another whole issue. In an imposition that they could print. And let's just put it in the communal era in Amana history communally is, let's put it 1860 to 1934. All right. What do you have, a fly there?
No, some piece of fabric going around.
Really?
Yeah, it's just fine. It could be some kind of unknown bug, but it's white and fluffy, so I'm assuming that it's
Oh, no,
fabric.
that must be an airborne seed propagating.
Yeah, their sinuses are bad this year. When you can't even have a Zoom without some kind of thing flying around.
I'm very interested in what we'll call
Simultaneous.
screen interference,
Yeah.
screen display interference. Nothing's more illegible than a black screen. Passing thought. Okay. So what happened? The composition being complete, the printed form being locked up. You printed to paper. Fine. Is that a book? No. You have to bind the book of pages to be useful, particularly to carry to meetings. You're not going to go in a rainstorm with a pile of printed sheets. You have to have a book binding. Communally, they did it all. Very important. So I keep tracking that because that's a very important step. What would happen after you bound a book?
You would share it.
You would use it. So that's a divide between makers and users. And each family would receive a copy of a book of
So they would
testimonial.
make enough copies for everyone rather
That's
than just the
correct. They'd make more
okay,
than.
they would make more than one or two or three copies for the elders or whatever they were, the
That's correct.
main group, they would make it for the whole congregation.
Now you can see how the handwritten, what we'll call fair copy journal, recedes in a context of very complicated transactions. And that is always true. There is no shortcut. That's a Barry Mosher quote. No shortcuts. Even today, why do we have this phobia of unverified false news? Because some of the decorum and the constructs of editorial command are lost. Not to paper, but to screen. It's another issue. Again, we're circling back to the bygone eras, what you referred to as the connotation of time and the documentation of time. So I've tried to go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Finish your thought.
Well, I've tried to situate the handwritten journal in a larger context, that it is a transactional device or medium that enables you to move from cognitive, bionic concepts in your mind to physical media that you can duplicate and distribute, among others. It's an important, and still is, and still will be, an important functionality. I'll show you an example. Are
Okay,
you are you ready?
I'm ready.
Of course, I hang out at all kinds of stationery stores and all kinds of Hobby Lobby stores. So I keep track.
The Martha Stewart. Did now,
Is it appearing
Gary, I would
backwards?
not buy that except at Hobby Lobby on the shelf that is everything is for sale. But you might have spent actual money for that.
This is from Staples.
Staples, okay, that you would have to spend actual money for.
Does it appear as a mirror, Martha?
Yeah, it no, Martha looks fine, but the journal itself, it looks like it's the back of the journal.
No, I'm talking about the lettering.
No, it appears as Martha. You've got to turn
Because on
around.
my
So,
screen it's taken as a mirror. Okay, where am I? I'm a bookbinder, all right? So
right.
I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, holy mackerel, as a mass-produced item, this is a real great effort. I know the pin closure. That's going back. Oh, it goes back to late antiquity. Pin closure, nice. Leather, nice. Cotton, cloth, beautiful. Rounded, pleated corners. I know what a bookbinder has to do this at speed. Round a corner, it's very hard. You have to be highly skilled. Sorry, I'm not showing you. See
No,
that?
I know. I saw that.
Okay. What else?
Oh,
Helpful rules.
lined papers.
Helpful rules. It's this way where you can title, or this way where you have a larger margin. The Western margins are 2, 2, 3, 4. So that's the way it would look this way. But that's upside down.
Right.
What's going on, Martha? What? This is a beautiful book. A machine sewn, beautiful thread, beautiful rolling. We're taking notes, managing projects, and journaling trips. Martha Stewart, made in China. Made
Right.
in China.
Right.
It has some of the affectations, if you will, some of the fundamentals of uh, the Far East.
Absolutely. With the
Different legacy.
margin,
Go ahead.
with the margins.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Mhm.
A Far Eastern margins to us look upside down. They are like this with the 4 on the top and the 2 on the bottom. It looks upside down to us.
Right.
But what's more important? Where else can you have such beautiful? Look at the cap. Look at these are sewing machines fed by hand. Uh, where else could you have industrialization based on elegant handwork? not in the West.
No, because the West would have to be paid. The people in the West would have to be paid to make that. And
Yeah, if you want to talk economics, that's another issue. But I'm talking about cultural legacy, East and West.
but this is Western cultural legacy, not necessarily Eastern cultural. Eastern it is, but not necessarily Chinese cultural legacy, or is it?
Sorry, what was your last?
Is it a cultural legacy of the Chinese?
It's cultural legacy of the Far East. That would include
Right.
Korea and Japan. That is to say, Chinese being the parent culture of almost everything, in invention wise, went both East and West. The issue for us, if you will, for the West, is why is Martha Stewart's uh, product, which is so elegant and so useful, made in China? And the reason I would offer culturally, the cultural difference is that the Far East industrialized handwork and the Far West industrialized the de-skilling of handwork with
Well,
what's
they
called
industrialized the
automation.
machine.
Sorry?
They industrialized the machine.
Yes. Very good. Different, different approach. Martha Stewart had to get her book made in China. You could say, oh, that was a historical distinction. Does anyone know how much delicate handwork goes into assembling a smartphone? How much delicate sewing machine feed by hand it takes to sew a baseball cap? It's not just the economics I would offer. It's a contributory issue, all right? But if
It's
you're
a
going to,
just a minute, Gary. It's a contributory issue for us, not necessarily for the Chinese, but and for the Chinese as well. It's a contribute. The economic issue is a contributory
I'm
issue
with you.
for us. If Martha Stewart had this made in America, it would be too much to for us to own. It would be too expensive for us to own. But because she has it made in China, she can mark it up, but still not as much as if it was made here. And it is a contributing factor to why it's made in China. But she is making for a worldwide market with the margins on the left and the margins on the right.
Could you make it? Could you make it here? I'll tell you, I'm a bookbinder, and I would be willing to critique the industrialization of the handwork done in China for Martha Stewart with anything done stateside to compete with it in terms of the craft skills level. Remember, if you're going to make, I'm taking a wild guess, 500,000 of these, fine, do it. By hand? No. I'm afraid thousands, yes, possible. But even that, handbook binding in the US, it's called fine edition binding, is a magnitude of 50 to 250. Yeah, Martha Stewart's Marketing Worldwide.
Right. Okay, I have to bring it around to ask you one final question and then we're going to
Okay.
wrap it up. Are there other journals beside yours in the book model
Collection. You're
collection?
getting it. I like to have the promotional name right. Book model collection, University of Iowa.
Okay.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure there are. Uh, Jim Croft has one. See, now I have to find it, and I will.
Well, we
Uh,
can always do another session on
yeah,
that.
yeah. I could pull off some because I've already shown you a picture of Shonalinos journals. I could show you some of Jim Croft's journals.
Or real journals that we have
Yeah,
copies of that other
yeah,
people, because
right.
you've explained yours. I'd like to hear you explain the others.
Fine.
All right, you're on.
Remember, but remember my parting shot. I can't explain the cognitive dimension of a person.
Of course not. I'm not asking you to do that, but I am asking you as an observer to make comment or show with the camera down some of these other journals that are in the book model
Collection.
collection
It's BMC.
MC.
It
Book
used to
model
be
collection.
HBMC. That meant historical, but it turned out,
Too cumbersome.
well, not too cumbersome. It turned out it's endless.
Right.
We're talking
But
about Martha Stewart's book, journal that I purchased at Staples yesterday,
how you purchased
going
that
into the
yesterday.
collection. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would like to continue this. I have to go to work, so I'm going to say goodbye to you now. And I loved our conversation, and I would like to continue with the other people's models, though you don't have to give me a cognitive interpretation of them, but you have to give me a visual interpretation
Mhm.
of.
I'll give you a bookbinder's critique.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Anna.
Oh,
See you.
you're most welcome. It was a lot of fun. Thank you,
See
Gary.
you again.
Okay, bye.